Hi and welcome to the Guildford Games Festival interview sessions. We are joined by Sam and Adam from Glowmade. All right, chaps.
Hey. Oh, yeah.
Hi. Now, I was thinking maybe you could just tell us who you are and what you do. Go on, you decide.
I'll start. So I'm Adam Pearce. I'm the gameplay lead at Glowmade.
And I'm Sam Hayhurst. I'm a gameplay programmer at Glowmade.
Hello. I see what we're doing here. Bit of gameplay. Nice. So first things first. I mean, we're gonna be talking about programming and coding and kind of the processes, I suppose, and perceptions as well. But let's just start with a short overview of what you guys have done prior to this point. And I don't mean coming to the boiler room. I don't need to hear all of it, but you know the score.
You go first.
All right. Thank you very much. I originally did a master's degree in mechanical engineering, and then having realised I didn't really want to do that, I took a great year out, and while I was doing that I did a short online course that was just game programming in Python, and I thought I could do that as a career. Nice. Came back, then I did a short 1-year course at Goldsmiths, and it was a great course because instead of it being more academic, it was just more like an apprenticeship. We're going to give you all the skills you need to get this job and nothing else. And then off the back of that, joined 22 Cans, where I was a gameplay programmer for 4 years. Learned a load of stuff.
Yeah, but that had its moments for sure. And interesting. So, I mean, I've worked at pretty much so many places that Peter's been. I've never ever met him. Oh, really? So you're currently the closest I've been to Peter. I think you might be the most recent to have been hanging out with him. Yeah. Weird, right?
Yeah.
Really weird.
And then there for 4 years. Then I joined Glowmade,
nice.
Where I've been for just over 2 years now.
Good choice. I'm a big fan of Glowmade. Really am a big fan. Some of my favourite people are in that studio. Adam.
So my path was probably more traditional, I guess. So I actually started making games, like Flash games, when I was like 12, 13 in my bedroom.
Prodigy. Wait, I can't even say it. Prodigy.
Don't say. And then, I was actually doing art, which was like 2D art, which was quite cool. And then I realised I was spending a lot of my time waiting for programmers to do things. So I thought, I'll give it a go myself. So I was I'm kind of good at maths, so I decided to do a computer science degree, which I failed my A-levels a lot of times, and there was a lot of it took me a while to get there, but I did get there and did a programming degree. And then in my sandwich year there, I did an internship at Criterion, just down the road.
I see.
Yes, and then basically I never left until about 2020 when I joined Glowmade.
Nice.
But there I was a programmer and a producer for a while as well, so I've kind of done a lot of different things. Yeah,
you've dabbled in many kind of areas, which ultimately, much the same with kind of transferable skills from elsewhere. It's all just getting a top-down kind of view to the industry and how to make games, right? That's cool. So we know that, programming is quite a general term, and there are many, many things within that anyone can kind of specialise in. So from each of you, what does a day in the life of your role at Glowmade look like?
So it starts with the stand-up.
Oh yeah.
Where you address just what did you do yesterday, and what are you planning to do today? And mainly, the big thing about this is setting up what is it that you're trying to achieve for today, and hopefully you do more than half of it.
That's a nice way to look at it. Sure you do.
But normally that kind of that often might spill over into a couple of meetings. So I don't know, if you're trying to do feature X, you might need to meet up with various other disciplines, designers, animators, artists, to sometimes just reiterate what it is that you're trying to achieve, and then hopefully get all the assets that you need and then kick off. And then most of the rest of the day is probably trying to do those things that I promised to do at the start of the day. Most days a week, we tend to do a playthrough mid-afternoon.
Nice. Very important stuff.
Really important to catch all the things. Because when you're making these features, what I find is that you test them in a very small, very controlled part, so you can really nail it down. But you obviously can't imagine the outcomes of this feature that you're testing when there are four players who don't know anything about what you've made are smashing all the buttons as fast as they can.
And don't have that insider kind of information as far
Yeah.
as what you were aiming for, or what they should be kind of.
Yeah.
And they just break things. Usually,
Absolutely.
it's mainly
Yeah.
designers breaking our stuff all the time.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
They're good at that stuff.
Mm.
And what's the kind of as far as role goes? Is there a difference in kind of your respective work?
Yeah, so my role is slightly different. So I'm kind of like overlook gameplay as a whole. So not necessarily like specifically on programming, but I did used to be the lead gameplay programmer. So I'm kind of like looking after all the systems and stuff, but then making sure that all the other disciplines like animation and art and design are kind of doing the right things. And it's kind of very production-y actually. But that being said, we're a small studio, so I get to do a lot of programming still and dive in. And there's a lot of all the stuff that Sam does, but I have even less time to do all that.
Understandable.
Yeah.
I guess like when it comes to the other disciplines within video games, if you're an artist, you're dealing with a medium that's right there and you're adding to it constantly and you're seeing how it looks in certain lights and certain spaces. If you're dealing with, environment lighting or game design to a certain extent, it's all, someone outside of video games can kind of think, okay, I can see what that would be. I can understand what that would be. Even as someone that works in games, coding is magic. I mean, it's magic. And ultimately what you're doing is putting down a super binary version of something that's coming out as something else. Explain. Like, what are you doing?
So I think the phrase that I always like to use is, I feel like one of the things as a gameplay programmer is your main job is to help the other disciplines achieve the change in the game that they want to. And I feel like a big part of, especially a gameplay programmer's role, is knowing how to communicate with the other disciplines such that you can because what you're trying to do is get the ideas out of their head and eventually turn them into numbers. And that's a lot of the process.
Just that in itself is magic. That is magic, right? How do you get something out of a creative's head and turn it into numbers? I love it.
Normally with really annoying pointed questions like, why do you care? It's like, well, if the player's doing this and the world is, I don't know, upside down and it's in night mode. And I was like, then what happens? They're like...
Yeah. Oh, we hadn't thought that far.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of the time when someone's, specifically a designer's, telling you about a system, they're talking about the emotion and kind of like what they're trying to get you over. And what we have to do is sort of turn that into a system somehow and figure out, okay, all the edge cases that could possibly happen and kind of nail it out from there. But it can be a long process to get from, this is kind of the effect that I want to happen to how do we actually get that to work and work with all the other systems in the game, and it can get pretty hairy sometimes.
Yeah. I can imagine. And I guess that I wonder, I suppose, if there is a misunderstanding that coding programming isn't a creative outlet, because it absolutely is. You have to have a creative kind of aspect to it. But where do you get inspiration for numbers?
Well, I would say that numbers are probably one of our most, rigorous and systems that we've created. And it's, I find them exciting.
Can you tell I hate maths? I hate it. This is my absolute kind of issue with anything that covers numbers. Is I think I might be number blind. I just haven't bothered to look into it properly because I don't like them enough.
I think when you look at certainly now when I play games, I'm trying to look at how they've actually done implementing it. So I'll often try and break things. I'll be like, okay, what happens when I do this, and what happens when I do this, and there's a lot of inspiration in how other people have made systems, which can often kind of give you a lot to ideas on how to
that makes sense.
how to implement something. And sorry, my face.
Oh, don't worry, we're not going to hear it. It's fine. That makes sense. I can see how that would, ultimately taking that creative element of it and using it to exist in a space that you haven't created and push those boundaries to see what the what the smoke and mirrors are to a certain extent.
And there's a lot of smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, to build on that one, I think the other, going back to what I said when I'm trying to you talk to the other discipline and you're trying to get their idea and get it into numbers, because as the especially the gameplay program, you're the first person to get eyes on this feature. You'll often, it's like, okay, I see what they're going for. They've explained their vision to me. But now that I'm getting it in, I can see, okay, that we could do this a number of other ways, which would allow us to do ABC. And normally that's a great first point to go backward to designer or artist. Like, okay, we could do this slightly differently. There has these advantages and disadvantages. And so, like, I think that's a very creative process. So you're right there in the implementation of that feature. And for me, that's one of the bits I really, really enjoy.
Like understanding the motivation as well, so that you have those options once you get to your kind of specialised area. That makes sense. I mean, I wish I understood it better. But it does. I see what you're saying. And I suppose it's it's something else that we've been talking about a lot with the festival interviews in general is lockdown and making games outside of lockdown. And I guess for your roles, it really is important to be with the teams and to know those teams well enough to have those interactions. Did you? I mean, what was it like when you guys were all working from home?
It absolutely
I know,
sucked.
Because we have peace. I like that. We can't really. I know what you guys are working on, and I love it. We can't talk about it yet. We're going to talk about it at some point. But how do you go about making games at a distance when what you're dealing with is such kind of a tangible thing in a way?
It was really tough. I think games in general, it was pretty not easy, but it was quite nice for us to move into lockdown, as in like everyone's on PCs anyway, and there's a lot of kind of like infrastructure in games generally that means that working from home from a concept is not super difficult. And I think we kind of
transition was easy.
We transitioned and we were working from home, and that was quite fine. I think the difficulty was the sort of the details and that kind of energy that you get in a creative conversation that you can't always get, and like you get bits of it, but you can't always get it in a Skype call or a Zoom call or whatever you use. And you kind of lose that kind of like back and forth, I feel, where it's kind of like, oh, what about this? And no, actually, if we change this, and then you kind of, it's hard to do that kind of thing when you're got a bit of lag and you're kind of like, you can't really see the body language or the tone.
And I should think even gameplay, even doing that, even sitting down and playing with the team, you're not seeing a controller in someone's hand and them enjoying a medium that's being pumped into their face, so that you can really kind of gauge that that feeling and excitement.
I completely agree. The other thing which I really, because we couldn't get that instant feedback on gameplay, one of the things I really found really difficult for me, like most of my job is is it fun to play? And feel is a very tactile thing. And so whenever I made a change, when I'm in the office, I can do so many changes and then just call someone over. It's like, oh, what do you think about this? Give them a controller. And they're like, oh, I like it, I don't like it. Whereas when we were during lockdown, like I went from however many iterations per day to 6. So I've got 6 attempts at making this feel good.
Yeah, just to ensure that everyone's kind of not getting completely overloaded with changes, and that you're all kind of keeping in the same page, I suppose, to a certain extent.
Yeah. So I felt like really, really slowed my my work down over lockdown.
I can imagine.
And generally as well, you kind of, there's a big difference between someone typing their feedback on Slack or whatever and saying, hey, I kind of didn't like whatever happened here, to you actually watching them play. Because often people don't quite know how to articulate the problems that they're having or why they're not having fun, and you can kind of sometimes see that when they're playing, but if they're just sort of writing it on a long list or whatever, it's kind of, you lose a lot of that kind of feel towards feedback, and that's just a big part of the job, really.
That makes sense.
You lose a lot of the context too, which makes tracking down the issues so much harder.
I feel like we're ripping on working from home, but like,
hey, it works for some people, it doesn't work for everyone, and that means some disciplines, it doesn't just mean the individual, it means that there are easier ways to do one's job. And it's actually a chat I was having with your community manager, like, just wander around. Now that you're in the office, just go and see what people are doing. Like, just go and peer over their shoulders and ask them what that is, and always be staring in wonder at everything that's happening in front of you. Because a lot of the kind of cues that I got from working with dev teams have carried me throughout my game playing life. Make sure that you're always, what was a really obvious one that Adam Stone at Lionhead? Look up. look up. Why aren't you looking up? Look, we created all of this. Look up. And it's actually given me like a real, like, no, make sure you're really enjoying this world when you step into it. You know, really take it in before you go ahead and do anything. But there must be so many little things like that where you guys have, okay, this is how I think this is going to be played and this is how it should be implemented. But then when it's in the hand of an entirely different brain, for want of a better term, then they're going to play it differently. So yeah, imagine the distance.
Yeah, and it's not even people outside the studio that come in and play. Even if you just hand it to the person next to you, you've got so much context in your head. It's like, oh, you know, I've been working on this feature for 2 to 3 days, and I'm intimately like well acquainted with it. Give it to someone else with no context. I was like, no, it's the Y button. Like,
no, give it back. Give it back.
You're doing it wrong.
Show you. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that makes sense. It's those nuances, right? It's the human kind of way of interacting without saying or you know, communicating is so important to this side of things. So how do you figure out when it comes to programming roles whether you're going to generalize a bit more like your role, Adam, where you've been looking at a lot more things, or whether you're going to really kind of specialize in it? Is it all about passion?
Yes.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like lame, but I think it is just like, what do you actually, you've got to figure out what you actually enjoy from programming. And some people, that is making things super optimized and, you know, run really well, or have like a really smart way of doing things. And, you know, that always lends yourself to like an engine programmer or someone who's going to be in code land a lot. But then I think like we are very similar programmers where we like looking at the result. Like what do you actually get to play at the end of it? And sometimes the code doesn't matter too much. It's actually what you get at the end of it. And lots of programs.
But that's it. If it works, right? So it doesn't really matter how beautiful it is, and that's the thing, right? With programming, there's beautiful code. I understand.
Never seen any.
I won't take that back to the rest of Glowmade. Hopefully they'll never watch this. It'll be fine. But yeah, I can understand how that would. It must feel like a big deal at the time. Like, oh no, I've done it. Doesn't. Oh, never mind. And then if it works, it's like, oh well, it works. It's cool. It translates. Then we'll run with it.
I think there's normally there's like make it work, then make it pretty. You know, because especially in gameplay now, we're so results driven. Like nailing that thing first can often answer a number of questions that are useful to the designer and therefore useful to the feature itself. And then you've always got time. It's like, okay, it's correct. Now I've got time to go back and make it pretty. Or it's like, it's not what we want. Nothing even close. Okay, just rip it out.
Strip it out, start again. Yeah.
You can often. I think it can be natural. Like, I think going into programming, you don't have to know exactly what you want to do because there's so many shared skills. As in, like, general programming is, you know, everyone has to do a bit of programming, whether depending on what language and depending on kind of what use case. But there's a real good foundation that you can do that isn't going to be wasted time. To be like, okay, maybe you move from wanting to do gameplay programming to graphics programming or UI programming or whatever. It's all got a good base that you're not sort of. It's not going to be wasted time if you try something out for 2 years or a year or whatever.
Yeah, definitely not.
All learnings. Yeah, and that, I mean that's the kind of theme that runs through everything that we do that you guys do as developers, which is to try and fail and learn and try it again and just keep doing that until something sticks and it works. Yeah, I'd never thought to apply that to programming too. That was more of a design thing. But speaking of design, I may have answered my own question. Which team is it that you say you spend the most time with in order to create your best work?
Design and animation, which I think is completely different to my previous role, where I'd say I spend the vast majority of my time with artists.
Interesting.
But I think it really depends on the specific project that you're on, and sometimes even down to the feature. Like there are some sprints where it's like never talk to an animator, and somewhere they'll be the only people I'd talk to.
Makes sense. Yeah, I guess it's all dependent on what the focus is of the thing that you're dealing with. Yeah.
That's I think that's the really nice thing about specifically gameplay programming, is that at any one time you could be pairing with, you know, a UI artist or an animator and usually you're kind of the glue that's going to put that stuff in the game, and so you've got a good back and forth of like, how does this look, you know, or with designers it's like, how does this feel, and that you can be paired up with lots of different disciplines, and I like that because you kind of look into a different sort of side of game dev.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that's another way of kind of finding that inspiration and creativity within your work time, is to be with different kind of disciplines and to understand their motivations and why they want something to be the way that it is. Yeah. So would you say, I know you guys both mentioned being very intelligent, intellectual chaps who went to unis and stuff. Is that the best path, do you reckon? Do you think are there what would be other ways off the top of your head that may not involve having a formal education for getting into what you do?
These days there are so many brilliant online resources for getting into programming. And I would say it's like, having done an engineering degree, like there's a great maths foundation, but I didn't do any programming whatsoever. I went from this Python evening course, which was 10 weeks or something. And that was enough to kind of give me the bug.
I like that. A good bug.
Great
It's a
choice
good
of
bug.
great choice of words.
It's not a catching bug. Wait,
yeah.
it kind of is.
Yeah, and I think that I think there are many great resources out there. You don't specifically need to do a course. I think the 1 year master's course I did at Goldsmiths was the vast majority of people saying, okay, here are the skills you need, and here are some resources, go and teach
Apply
yourself.
them, yeah.
And so I don't think it's specifically that you need that rigorous education. It does really help. Even if it is just someone pointing their finger in various directions and say, go do it.
Well, that's it. And someone who has the knowledge and the standing to just make you feel confident that, okay, this must be the right thing to do. Okay, just, taking an authoritative voice and being able to run with the information given.
Yeah. I have heard of, on that subject, I have heard of quite a few mentorship schemes. So it's if someone wants to get into the industry self-taught, normally a mentor can provide that sort of overarching direction. So you wouldn't need the degree.
Yes, self-teaching yourself programming is hard, and I'm not very good at self-teaching. So going to doing some sort of formal education was good because it meant that I had to do it, basically, and I couldn't just do something else.
That's why I didn't. That's why I didn't.
But I would say that so you don't have to it helps if you're not very good at self-teaching yourself, but I would say that you need a good foundation, and often with programming I see a lot of sort of people who want to do programming not only use it in sort of this context of games, which can sometimes lead them to the sort of the programming is, I guess, subpar, or it's not kind of going to build them up for the future. There's a real foundation of programming that you have to kind of learn of classes and structures and all this kind of stuff that I think if you dive right in without doing a lot of that stuff, you can get by, and that's fine, but then you're going to get scuppered eventually of kind of I don't actually understand what's going on here. So that's what I always really appreciate about, because I just did a straight computer science course which isn't games related at all, and I learned a lot about the actual foundations of programming, which was really useful. And I would say that you don't have to do uni for that, for sure. There are plenty of resources, but it's worth sort of, if you are interested in programming, doing that kind of thing first before kind of diving straight into games programming, because there's a layer on top that you can often forget about, and then
I completely agree. So when I part of the entry requirements for that 1 year course is that I had to do a fundamentals, a programming 101, which was exactly that. And I just bought 1,000-page tome of I don't know, C++ programming, and it's just got just work through that.
And it is really boring.
Oh, it's so
and
dull.
at the time you can't see why it's going to be useful, and there's always your course memes are always kind of data structures and algorithms are the worst kind of thing, but I still use them every day.
It's kind of classical training for programmers, right?
Yeah.
You're doing the everything you need to get you to sight reading so that you don't have to think about it once you're a concert pianist.
It's like in art when you want to do figures.
Yes.
Sorry.
Sure.
It's like in art when you kind of want you want to do figure drawing, but you don't know the proportions of the body. And you can kind of see when someone's just done it by eye and they're like, ugh, and you turn
Looks a bit like this.
Yeah, and then but then when someone goes back and says, look, you know, the head always has to be X height, and there's that helps a lot going forward. And I think the same is true for programming.
Yeah.
Yeah, so almost like setting the boundaries, I suppose. But obviously, boundaries don't really exist within the space we're dealing with. But I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Getting that kind of base knowledge down so that you're able to play with it, to be creative with it, and pull it forward into other mediums.
Yeah, you can't. The way I like to think about it is, it's tools in your toolbox. If you've got a shed with no tools in, there's not much you can make. The more tools in the shed, the more things you can
You
make.
can call yourself a carpenter, but if there's nothing in the box, then it's not happening.
Yeah.
Got it.
And
Okay.
we've all got great analogies to mean the same thing.
Yeah.
We could do this all day. Maybe we should. Okay, cool. So what would a programming portfolio look like? Like how would you put something like that together? Do you share I'm not going to answer the question. How would you put something like that together?
So I think the first, I've actually never put one together, but when I've looked at when we look at portfolios, I think there are a couple of things that we're really interested in. One is they've worked on something big.
Mm-hmm.
I see quite a lot of small projects that are just one thing. They've achieved, they've gone out probably to do something really quite complicated, but because the games that we make are big projects worked on by multiple people for multiple months, even years, and there are problems that come across that arise when only working at these sides of code bases. So that's one of the things I'm always quite interested to see, is that has this person worked on something where they may have had to have gone through a major refactor, or it's had to go through quite a bit of changes, rather than it being like a project where they've tried to achieve one thing and then as soon as it's done they've got to
Or reading other people's code as well. Actually, working in not your own source base is a skill, because not everyone has the same handwriting when it comes to code, and lots of people like doing things differently. So working in a different code base that's not your own or written from scratch, which you're doing a lot when you're kind of like making a portfolio because you want to just sort of do other things. It's quite useful.
And I suppose ultimately the trying and failing is worth documenting in these places as well, because that failure could then lead to something that you weren't expecting, and it made a great feature and everything was wonderful, and you can kind of document that experience.
Oh, totally. That's like one of the first questions we ask. It was like, oh, what was it like working on this project? It was like, what went wrong? Why did it go wrong? What did you do about it?
What next?
Because that is a day-to-day occurrence.
Things go wrong.
That's it, yeah. In game dev, that breaking stuff and the emails that will go around a studio saying, okay, don't put anything in the build, guys, we've got a problem, and then trying to work out who did it. That stuff happens all the time, and it's not necessarily bad. We should be looking for these push points, these breaking kind of points, so that we can ensure the games are robust and beautiful and everything that we expect them to be.
Got to break some eggs.
Yeah, there we go.
Another
Oh, let's
analogy.
keep chatting about that. What else you got? So I was going to I wanted to kind of discuss the differences between programming at an indie level and programming at a AAA level. But again, overview, what would be the main differences between those two spaces?
Quite a good segue from what we just spoke about, because in AAA you are working on usually like monolithic source bases. At EA there's working on Frostbite, which was a 15-year-old engine.
I can't imagine how difficult. I mean, I interviewed those devs last year, and my brain was melting by the end of that conversation. Literally talking about Frostbite and how it works and what they've done.
Yeah.
And it's astounding.
It's an amazing team, but there is some code that was written 15 years ago. Still from the original Battlefields and stuff. So, you've just got to get in there and figure out the section of the code that you need to know, compared to in a smaller engine or a smaller source base where you can kind of know everything, or at least understand how everything works. So there's a big difference of sort of picking your battles, I guess. The other thing with AAA is that there are far more people working on the game, so you have to be a lot more careful.
Diligent, yeah.
Because if you do break the stuff, in our studio you break it and probably 5 people are going to be blocked for the 10 minutes that it takes to reverse something or something like that. Whereas in AAA, has to go through all the pipes, and then you could end up breaking a play test, which means 100 people can't play the game, or 50 people can't work on what they're doing, and that's a lot of dollars.
And
so
time, the amount of time that it takes for something to get up and running again, and then for people to get back into the creative headspace they were in to continue doing the work they were doing before it happened.
So I think that's kind of a couple of the biggest differences. But with indie, you can try things out a lot quicker, and you can, you're a lot more agile, and we always, and for another analogy, we always compare it to you're a speedboat compared to a ship tanker kind of thing. You can turn quickly and adapt.
You've got that, space to adapt, speed. Yeah.
So,
I can't imagine, stepping into something as big as EA and then being faced with Frostbite. Like, okay, you guys have made this in a very specific way. Give me a couple of years, is what it would be for me. Let me just try and work this out. If I were a programmer, not me as me, that would be way, way more time. I've spent a lot of time in game dev studios. I've worked with a lot of programmers. There are certainly some misconceptions about a programming individual, I think. And I think the best, although saying that this is not a misconception, this happened. But the best example I have is the zone aspect, right? That everyone in game studios knows not to bother a programmer if he's got his headphones on. You don't go near him, just leave him to it, let him get it done. There was one example of that, I won't say where there was one particularly really, really talented programmer who had come out of some kind of military training, I think, of some description, much earlier in his career. He was working late one night. The cleaner who came into the studio didn't know about the rule not to bother the programmer and tapped him on the shoulder, and he broke her nose.
Whoa.
Just because it's reflex. He was so in the zone
gosh.
doing the thing, and no one ever bothered him, so he assumed it was something bad, and all the red lights went off, and he...
Oh my God.
Yeah, he broke the nose with his elbow. What misconceptions about programmers could we break down right now? I think the creative one is up there. I wonder if people don't fully understand the creativity that you need to essentially create something from nothing.
I think definitely. Yeah, I think for any, I don't know, when you have a problem, and our job is essentially to solve problems, the solution is often creative. There are often very few, apart from the most trivial of bugs, which have one solution alone. And so coming up with solutions is a creative endeavor. And the vast majority of times you come up with a couple and you go, you weigh the benefits of one versus the benefits of another. And often then often Adam, goodness, Adam, you could do it like this or this. And
Neither.
Neither. Could you do it properly, please?
I didn't ask you to do any of this. What's happening? Yeah, brilliant.
So I think that's a good one to nip in the bud. And it doesn't, and that's just not from a gameplay programming perspective. That's graphics or engine or whatever else.
It's definitely not going through the motions and just you're not just copying and pasting one piece of code to the other. It's creative problem solving for sure. So you have to be really creative, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, the misconception of programmers being grumpy and unhelpful is.
I've learned that's not true.
Yeah.
I've learned. I mean, sure, there's a few.
All people can be grumpy and
exactly.
unhelpful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting to think about the dynamics and how a programmer kind of sits within the wider team and how they all kind of work together. And it would be crazy to say they're all like this. We know it, but actually, I suppose the reality is that you are having to problem solve on the fly. That takes a lot of brain power and focus, and game studios aren't always the quietest and calmest places to exist.
That's the headphones.
There you go.
Yeah.
I do recall one, I think he was a designer though that I worked with. He used to have a little sign on his headphones that said, "Do not disturb unless on fire," which I used to quite enjoy. That was a good way to do it. Okay, cool. I'm going to curveball it ever so slightly. If there were one Guildford game from a programming perspective that you would like to have been involved in the making of, which would it be?
I'm torn because one of my favourite games is Burnout Paradise.
Ooh. I think it just won our... oh no, was it Need for Speed? I can't remember. It was Paradise. Paradise just won its round of the Guildford Games World Cup.
Absolutely love it.
Uh-huh.
Good choice.
But I think the systemic nature of Dungeon Keeper,
Yeah.
I think that would have been really interesting.
Yeah. Imagine being in that studio, like, oh man, the stuff dreams are made of. Being around in Guildford when it all kicked off, and I know there are people in this room that actually were there, which is mad. But it feels ethereal to me, like, oh, mystical time, beautiful. Yeah, that's a good choice.
Mine would have to be Theme Hospital, because there's so much going on in that game from a system's point of view, and there's a lot of like fun things as well. And I also played that game to death when I was younger.
It's the perfect way to spend days upon days upon days of your life.
Yeah.
They just slip away and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that game too. That's up there. If Little Big Planet hadn't been made in Guildford, that would probably be my favourite. Awkward. We're just so blessed. It's unfortunate. Final question then, chaps. If there's anyone out there who may or may not have any kind of programming understanding or background, what advice would you give? Not necessarily young people, not necessarily people that are looking to already be in the industry and move to a different part, but yeah, anyone.
The hardest part is starting, like getting your develop environment set up, which is a lot of syllables to say open a code editor. But it is like, I really find it the most intimidating thing, at least for me, to start was like, where do I even start? And how do I get, I don't know, my if statements to do something? And I think once you just try and, I think the key thing is make a decision, go with one of the big off-the-shelf engines, watch a couple of tutorials, and then just start trying it. I think you've just got to throw yourself in the deep end.
Yeah.
You'll immediately sink.
And that's okay.
But that's
cool.
the point. Yeah, that's the start of learning.
I love that.
Yeah, I guess mine would be in similar vein, but don't bite off more than you can chew.
Yeah.
It's very easy for someone to be like, right, I'm going to instantly start programming a game, and I've planned all this game out, and I'm going to do all the programming, but like, that's hard, and even professional devs find shipping games hard. So
Yes.
like, start small, and practice a lot. It's not, you just got to keep going at it and kind of like trying different things and getting experience really. And it's not as scary as it seems, I think, is the other one.
Yeah.
I guess it's that thing, any role that you aspire to do, or certainly within medias where it feels so, whoa, video games, movies, music, those kind of things. There's a certain element of just run at it, like just give it a go. Don't be scared, go for it. And as we've said, failing is totally cool as long as you learn something from it.
There are so many resources available now, like the internet has so much stuff on it, like compared to when I was trying to get into games and stuff, that you can find a YouTube tutorial and follow it from start to finish and have some sort of playable thing. And so find the resource that is right for you. Some people like web things, some people like YouTube, some people like books, but there's a lot. So yeah,
I guess there must also be an element now with the breadth of games that we have, that indie is definitely becoming more of a central thing to the wider game playing audience, that you can look at some of those games and probably understand once you get into the coding language or whichever you're going with, that those games made by small teams you'll be able to look at and break down and understand a little bit better. So there's probably an element of playing.
That's a key skill, that. And it's certainly like a lens that you put on when you're playing a game, and you can often really see the decisions that the team has made.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff.
there's also a lot of open source games as well that you can like dive in and see how people have done. So lots of indies just release their source base
Cool.
on the
I didn't
internet
realise that.
that you can just dive into the code and be like, oh gosh, they did this, or look, this is how they did it. So
That must be fascinating.
yeah,
I think Celeste did their character controller,
Yeah.
and that's a great resource.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's really worth looking at.
Terry Kavanagh's VVVVV has the entire source base, and that's like a crazy game to look at.
I need
so.
you guys to write all of this down and chuck it in the description so people can go and have a look.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for taking time out to come and talk to us.
It's been really
It was
good.
Awesome, and I'm sorry that I don't understand programming as well as I should. I'll brush up for the next time we hang out, promise.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Cheers,
Yeah,
guys.
thanks.